Good afternoon, family, and welcome to yet another Jeff Ed with me, Coach Shaun. As mentioned in the title today, I will be addressing the origins and a little brief explanation of a couple of diets, basically breaking down their restriction levels, their suitability levels, their fraudulent levels in some of them. I've got a few comical ones as well. So if you're here and you're joining me, get stuck, dive into the comments as usual. Let me know that you are here with a little hello. Let me know how everything's been going recently. Hoping still setting the good tones, making sure that we keep checking the boxes. You know me and how I keep advocating that. Auntie Pat, as always, thank you for joining. Yes, Saturday you were a little bit busy. Missed you out on the prom. Getting stuck. Gav, Michelle, my shapeshifters. Hello. Always nice to see some of you guys involved. We'll give a couple of minutes as usual just to let everybody sort of get in, join us. Basically, in terms of the Coach Tony always puts me under pressure when she's here with these Jeff Eds because talking about diets, she's part of nutrition, the pressure's on. Afternoon, Michelle. Thank you for joining us. But basically, I wanted to cover initially the origins of diets, where the phrase comes from, exactly where we have picked it up before in history. I wanted to touch base on a couple of the more popular ones and then a couple of the sort of more comical fad-based ones. I'm going to talk a little bit, 3 or 4 minutes on each particular one. I think I have 7 to cover. Basically, I'll ramble through it. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to dive in. And then, of course, once I've covered each particular little section, I'll dive into the comment section and just see where we are, making sure that everybody's up to date. Lorraine, good afternoon. Where are you there this morning? So 2 minutes in, I hope that's everybody here and ready to join. So to basically break everything down, because I do think in terms of modern day, we've lost a lot of what meaning is in terms of this industry, and because of a little sneaky marketing, it's not really, again, our fault. So the word diet itself is definitely a little bit missed these days. Our diet is everything that we eat habitually. Standard. It's not a restriction-based thing. It's not, again, what has been popularized these days. It's something that encompasses absolutely everything that we eat. In terms of origins of diets and when they first started popping up, this goes literally as far back as human recorded history. We've got some recorded history of Greek wrestlers, or in fact, anybody that took part in their variation of the Olympic Games back then. There's records of them being put on restrictive diets to encourage certain types of benefits according to whatever they played. So wrestlers would be on particularly a mass building diet, nutrition plan. Anybody involved in long distance athletics would have been on something a little bit leaner. We know about Spartan and Roman gladiators that were also encouraged to be on slightly leaner nutrition plans to encourage the bulk as well. And then while there's no actual evidence of it, there are sort of written tales of even knights in the British Empire being served different foods at their tables to what people typically in banquet halls would be eating, suggesting that they were maybe looking a little bit more disciplined, following something slightly more rigid to keep them obviously in fine fighting form. Good alliteration there. Today's meaning obviously doesn't encompass that. The diet that we throw around these days basically refers to restrictions and limitations. These are varied across different diets that we have, and those are exactly what I wanted to talk about and discuss. Christina, welcome. Basically, I wanted to touch first on the more common ones. Intermittent fasting is one of the bigger and more commonly known ones these days. A little bit more of a mainstream variation to what we culturally and religiously would be more commonly, more familiar with, at least in just generalized fasting. The point of fasting was always to try and obtain the benefits of 2 different types of states. So when our body is in a feeding state, it has a very particular reaction. When our body is in a fasted state, it gives a different type of reaction. And we also encourage the use of different types of energies. So when we go into a fasted state or hours without carbohydrates, our body then depletes itself of glucose, and we start looking toward more of a fat base, or the storage base at least, to utilize as a source of energy. So the obvious benefits that come across with that are lower heart rates. We've got lower inflammation markers. We've got extended periods of life. And one of the more significant things that stuck out in every culture at least back in the day, had a different phrase for it, but more commonly these days we know of it as epilepsy. And they had an incredibly low number of epileptic cases in their communities. Through more modern day research and understanding, we came to figure out exactly how or why that was. And it's because the body utilizes different types of energy to what the brain utilizes. So the body in terms of glucose and glycogen, and the brain in terms of fats. So when we had a slightly higher fat-based diet, we noticed that there was an elimination of epilepsy in particular, especially now more towards the early 1900s, towards the mid as well. And that leads me then to speak. Let me just actually finish up with the intermittent fasting. Obviously, with regards to intermittent fasting, we know there are various types of schedules. There are from 12 and 12, where you basically eat everything you want to for 12 hours. There is no restriction, carbs, fats, proteins, get it all in good times. And then you would fast for 12 hours. There are versions of 16 and 8. There are versions of 20 and 4. There's also weekly versions where for 5 days, you don't really care. You indulge, you eat, you enjoy. And then for 2 days out of the week, you severely limit your calorific intake down to pretty much 300-400 calories a day. So you are effectively keeping yourself just enough to stop yourself from dying, I imagine. More commonly than these days, we have what leads me then to the second point of the higher fat-based diet, and something that was a little bit less based around peaks and troughs, but around a more standard, well-fed nature, is the ketogenic diet. The ketogenic diet's principle then is to encourage, again, a lack of carbohydrates that would keep the body on a high-fat diet. It would force the liver to break down fats into a source of energy that we call ketones, and then that supplies the slightly there with the ketogenic diet and fasting in general. Obviously, the restriction now is introduced with a very, very low number of carbohydrates and increasing that number of fats. That would then give us the exact same benefit that a fasted state would give us, because the body utilizing a greater source of fats as opposed to the other types of energies would then increase the brain functions, reducing the cases of epilepsy again. So in the 1920s, I think 1911 is typically when it came around, the 1920s when it became more popularized, and into the 1930s, and that's when we started seeing it being introduced as a cure for epilepsy, but a big alleviation in its symptoms and obviously the physical seizures. So that's now even what we see today is prescribed in children, particularly with cases of epilepsy, is to go into a higher fat, lower carb style diet. Team, as I've mentioned, as I'm ripping through these, don't hesitate to throw some comments. If you've got anything as I'm talking about it, the fasting now or the ketogenic diet, please don't hesitate to sort of throw some few questions in. I have got mountains of information here. I'm trying desperately, as I say, not to ramble on and get you all lost in, but definitely want to be able to provide enough information to keep us sort of exactly on the path of where we want to go. This leads me then into yet another high-fat, low-carb diet, which we South Africans particularly will be very familiar with, which is known as the Banting Diet. A little bit older than what most people would come to think, because this developed initially in the 1860s by a chap named William Banting. He was just a normal human being who suffered from obesity. He was then put on this nutrition plan, which he followed, got dramatic results from, and then it also became a little bit more publicized and a little bit more popularized. Over time, of course, this was then reinvented for slightly more modern day in Professor Tim Noakes, who then created the real food revolution following the Banting Diet. I don't think it's common knowledge as well that the initial, interest from Noakes' side was that there was a carbohydrate-resistant friend of his who took part in marathon running. Anybody who's aware of marathon running knows that carbohydrates are typically your main source of fuel, hence carbo loading. And if you are carbohydrate resistant, you get tummy cramps, you get bloatation with water, levels of fatigue through the roof. There's just nothing in it. So it was difficult to try and get yourself well fed for these marathons without obviously being able to tackle carbs. So an alternative source of energy in fats was then introduced without any of the side effects. The difference then with the Banting and the ketogenic diets is that the Banting diet just offers a slightly higher base of carbohydrates than what the ketogenic is, practically 0 to 10%, whereas Banting can offer at least 25, sometimes up to 30%, depending on which nutrition plan you're following specifically in terms of carbohydrates. So all slightly increasing them more, but also with their purposes. So as we come to learn that nutrition plans in general are designed for purpose. They're not just for absolutely anybody to Google off the internet, take it home and think this is going to work for me, because initially it was designed for somebody. There was a specific purpose to it. On to the final of what I'm going to be calling our sort of understood scientifically based one. Sorry, I shouldn't have done that. There is actually real scientific evidence to support absolutely all of these. The one where I'm going to start kind of drawing the line now, and before we go into the more fad-based diets, is the Paleo Diet, or more specifically, the Paleolithic Diet. Now, the principle behind this diet, we can assume that it has existed forever. However, unfortunately, we have absolutely no record of what was being eaten in that period. The principle surrounding it is that we as modern day humans haven't evolved as quickly as what our agricultural processes in particular have developed. We are now introducing more GMOs to our food than what our body is effectively able to handle and digest effectively. So we want to now remove all of the modern day advances in science and take us right back to this Paleolithic era, where we would be eating basically foods that came in only that era. It is incredibly limiting diet that has absolutely no scientific backing towards it. So that's why I say it's a little bit touch and go, because based on what it's encouraging, we can look at it and go, yeah, you know what, it's going to give good results, but it's really, really restrictive. And it's definitely not, obviously being Paleolithic, not got anything for us to sort of base scientific study upon. So the principal foods that you would be trying to load up on then would be your lean cuts of beef, any animal product in general, around eggs. The foods that I guess you would be trying to avoid is anything that is mass processed. So basically anything that you will find in a box or a jar in a store. So you would want to be having non-starchy vegetables or free veg, anything that's grown sort of fresh in the garden, as opposed to perhaps your wheats and your mealies and your barleys and that type of thing. We would be looking at nuts and more natural oils and avocados, as opposed to, again, your more vegetable oils or even peanut bases, because Paleolithically we weren't nomadic. We were nomadic. We weren't settlers. So we were moving from place to place. It would be very difficult for us to grow anything to be able to say, oh, we had lots of wheat. We probably didn't. So that's effectively where that takes us. Let's just get back in here. Ethel, welcome. Mainie, Danielle, Alex, good to see you here. Sorry, the comments come through in chunks, so please note if I'm missing anything, I'm not ignoring you. It may just not have popped through yet. Back into it. With regards to the Paleolithic diet, the foods that, again, as I was saying, that we need to avoid, all dairy products, because we weren't cultivating animals in the way that we would be utilizing their dairy. We wouldn't be utilizing fat. Again, as I said, we were nomadic. We principally wouldn't be taking a lot of animals with us. So cereals, grains, as I mentioned, because we weren't in areas long enough to be able to sit and grow these things. Anything sweet and sugary, to be fair, unless it's fruit, and anything that's basically considered highly processed. So it is very, very restrictive. It's not something that encompasses a lot of what we get today. When I mentioned GMOs, I know there is a little bit of a sort of tentative thought that can be watered because there is a little bit of negative news, but GMOs are an incredible advance in society. It's a modification to our foods at a genetic level for a number of reasons. You could modify crops to be able to grow in drought-ridden areas. You could modify them to be grown in flooded areas. You can modify them to yield more fruit off of a smaller area. So nothing sort of inherently negative, but basically as this Paleolithic plan suggests, is that we avoid all of that because our body hasn't evolved at the rates of which these processes have evolved. So it is a take it with a pinch of salt type of conversation to be having, which now leads me into my fad trio, I'm going to call them, because they come with absolutely no scientific evidence. They are popularized by celebrities, sports stars that are just, I think, looking for a little bit of quick clout, as we would call it these days, a little bit of attention. But as I say, they're not really based on anything. So the first I wanted to talk about, because it's popping up quite a lot, the chaps are loving it. It's called the Carnivore Diet. The Carnivore Diet, again, high fat, high protein diet. You'll notice that there's quite a common trend about this. The only difference now is that it is purely animal product based. So it's dairy and it's meat. That's it. We are now erasing or eliminating at least every single type of valuable nutrient you can get in your life from grains, from fruits, from typical vegetables, as well as one of the greatest things that I talk about often to my client base is fiber. If we are not eating plants, we are not able to get fiber. And anybody who's been on a high protein diet will understand what protein does to our insides. It blocks them up. So long term, being on a carnivore diet is not going to be any good inside the body. So typically, again, the foods that you would be eating are any meat-based product, fish, seafood, as well as any other animal product. You could be drinking bone broth. You could be having the animal fats as themselves. There's a lot of sort of Inuit-based cultures do with their narwhal, their seal. Low lactose dairy, so butters, heavy creams, hard cheeses, those types of things. So your foods that you would be avoiding, and this is the list that's just devastating because it's your good stuff: fruits, veggies, grains, nuts, seeds, high lactose dairies, milks, yogurts, for example, legumes, sugars, plant-based oils, basically any beverage that's not water. So it's a terribly restrictive nutrition plan that has absolutely no viable benefit toward. So definitely something I wouldn't encourage anybody to do. Like Alex says, for one of the chaps, when you say carnivore diet, I'm going to be eating steak all day, it's the first thing that our sort of mind goes toward, and we think, oh, I'm in it. That's exactly what I want. The second of the sort of fad three that I wanted to talk about is it's actually probably gained a little bit more in popularity over the last few years. Is called the Alkaline Diet. Now, this is tough for me to even talk about because it's absolute nonsense. But principally, the way that this was, let me try and get this correct. The way that it was initially designed or brought about, the principle is that our body's metabolism is treated as a fire. If we put different fuels into a fire, it creates different flames, first of all, and then different kinds of bar and waste products. In this regard, is called ash. So we know if we throw wood or petrol or coal, some different chemicals, we can get green flames, white flames, red flames. And then as a result, we get a different type of ash, whether it's poisonous, normal ash, we can help fuel the ground, whatever the case is. This is now what the Alkaline Diet is pretty much based around, is that if we feed our body a high acidic diet, we're going to be left with an acidic metabolic ash as a result. And this acidic ash is going to leave us lethargic. It's not going to give us everything that we need. In fact, it just creates a lack of motivation across the board. So the idea now is to be introducing more neutral or alkaline-based foods so that we get a more alkaline-based ash as a byproduct, which is then said to be more supported by the body and helps a digestive system. It is all utter hogwash. Our metabolism does not produce any kind of ash at all. This one, you won't be surprised to find out, was popularized by some celebrity I haven't even bothered committing to name because they just have added that much value. So again, when you hear about alkaline diets like this, these are fad diets. If you know anything a celebrity encourages you to do, you probably shouldn't be doing it. The foods, just in case you're interested, foods that would be considered highly acidic would typically be any kind of meat, poultry, fish, dairy, eggs, animal products, alcohol, of course. Your neutrals or natural foods would be natural fats, starches, sugars, and then your alkaline fruits. I mean, your alkaline foods would basically be fruits, nuts, what we call non-starchy veg or free veg, above ground vegetables, pretty much root-based as well. No, I've confused myself there. Do you know what I'm talking about? Free veggies. So again, not that you should be cutting out anything that they deem acidic because it's got purpose in its life. full balance. Always full balance. Excuse me. And then the final one I wanted to touch on again, which is gaining a little bit more popularity these days, the blood type diet. A lot of people have also been hearing about this. I've had one or two of my clients that have mentioned it, and this is why I wanted to introduce it. But it is unfortunately another sort of celebrity-based nutrition plan that hasn't had any valuable scientific study attached to it. The principle is that as our early ancestors would have evolved, we as humans have evolved to needing separate diets, nutrition plans to support our separate types of blood. This is, of course, as I've said, there's no valuable science to suggest that this is correct. So definitely not something to be encouraged to follow again, because we're introducing limitation, we're introducing restriction, and that's not how we find success when it comes to these types of plans. So just typically the type A would be called agrarian or cultivators. People that would be eating along that plan would be rich in plants, would be free of your toxic red meats. It very closely resembles a vegetarian-based diet. The type B blood would be eating what's called the nomadic diet. People can eat plants, most meats. Again, nothing that would be used to grow at set in time agriculturally. So no corns, no wheats, no grains type of things. Lentils as well. Basically, nomads would be eating what was on the go. So figuring that out would be a treat. The type A, B, the enigma, is a obviously mixture of types A and B. The foods that you can eat include seafood, dairy, beans, grains, but you should also avoid corn, beef, and chicken. And then type O is the hunter. This is a typically high protein base, where certain fruits and vegetables are allowed, but we limit the number of grains, legumes, and dairy that we eat. So very closely resembling the Paleo Diet that I mentioned, the Paleolithic era. So as said, they are all to be taken with a pinch of salt. There isn't really anything going on in terms of scientific value to those final three. Michelle, that is absolutely it. We just eat and hope for the best. That's all. Look, in summary, I think that's the point of when it comes to these nutrition plans. It's very difficult to be able to prove any of them false, because the reality is that when you introduce discipline, you introduce a little bit of restriction, then the reality is that you will get positive results. That's why anybody who's ever advertised, stick to this, I got good results, my friends did, is probably been telling the truth, because for the first time in a long time, they watched their calorific intake, they watched the amounts of foods in what portion at what time. That's what yielded the results, not what diet they were on. The overall just being good is basically what's led to them getting the successes. So in summary, that's effectively where we as Jeff try and bring in the promotion of whole valuable nutrition plans, where you are not excluding anything, you are not restricting anything, because the reality is that restriction often sets up for failure. If it's something that's difficult for you to stick to or you don't enjoy it, it is not going to be long term. And that's why we need to introduce, especially in things like a day and a half or 5.5 day cycles, these are what then sort of bring a little bit more balance. And we have to have, as I say, our moments of indulgence, because we are human. Nance hates all the fad diets. Say drink coffee and watch your waistline disappear. Yeah, there's a caffeine diet that did cover, because there are a few of them, to be honest, that are quite liquid-based. They are not worth paying any mind, to be fair. Again, everything needs to come from full, valuable, wholesome food. You are always going to be supplementing if you're missing something out. So somebody who's not getting fiber will have to supplement fiber, whether it comes in a powdered sort of add to water drink space. But at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to get it wholesomely. You're going to have to be supplementing. Yes. Sorry, Coach Tony, I was reading the wrong thing there. We say you're supportive of the blood type diet. The blood type diet, also being as restrictive it is, doesn't allow for allergies. So if you can't eat something but being told your blood type can only feed you this, then we're setting ourselves up for failure. So pinch of salt both ways there. But you, through sort of trial and error as a human being, know what we can eat and what we can't eat, especially when it comes to allergies. And then, as Auntie Pat says, enjoy what you eat. That is the basic premise. Team, we talk about deficits a lot, and that is ultimately where we need to start looking. We all have a basal metabolic rate. It is the number of calories that our body needs to just survive. If we get that in amount and we create a small deficit from just a little bit of movement and a little bit of exercise, then we will be on the path, whether it's 1 gram a day or 1 kg a week, you will be on the path to success. You don't have to restrict. You don't have to limit, of course, unless you've got actual dietary restrictions and limitations. I talk about people being lactose intolerant. You can't be on dairy. I get that. But if the choice is yours, get a little bit of absolutely everything. We find that it makes things a little bit more sustainable. It makes us feel a little bit more wholesome as humans. And it makes, as I say, everything just a little bit easier to find success in. So, team, I don't support it. Sorry, misread. It's what happens when you're trying to read comments and talk. Coach Tony does not support the blood diet. Don't listen to my fake news. But team, I just wanted to say thanks again for coming to Get Stuck In. I hope, as usual, I didn't just waffle on and get a little bit lost. I had, as I was laughing with Henny in the background, I've got a book, I've got a tablet, I've got 2 phones open beside me. I had a lot to issue, but judging by the time, I would never have got through everything. So hopefully cover just a little bit of what I needed to, just to give you a basic understanding of why these were initially developed, particularly in the cases of the valuable ones, or the valid ones in the ketogenic diet and fasting, but then also sort of where dieting in general has taken us on a path of negativity. So keep your foods going in, follow your Jeff plan, get a little bit of everything, team, and you'll be on the path, as I say, to good times. So thanks again for joining me. And until next month and next time, have yourselves an epic, epic week, everybody.